Welcome to the Invincible Innovation Show, the podcast for changemakers. Each week, I talk to the most fascinating entrepreneurs and innovation leaders about innovation, strategy, and design. Hey, great to see you. Welcome to another talk about becoming an innovative, creative, effective leaders. Welcome to Invincible Innovation Live Show. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm Mazor, Kario, innovation and value creation expert, and I'll be your host. And today with me, I have Kristin, partner at Inusual. Great to see you, Kristin.
Nice to see you too. Thank you so much for having me, Adi.
Yeah, I'm so happy that you're here. I'm sure it's going to be really interesting because we talked in the past, so I'm really sure it's going to be fun.
Absolutely.
We're live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook, and you're much invited to join the discussion and ask questions. So please feel free to do so. Now we can start. It seems that all companies need to innovate. What are the biggest obstacles to innovation as you see it?
So I actually do think that that a culture of the company culture can be the biggest obstacle, really. Not necessarily the people they have in the organization, but rather the way those people are coming together. So whether it's a culture of fear or an extremely hierarchical organization, or teams that are made up of yes people, as they're called, like the typical, which kind of goes hand in hand with the idea of groupthink, that people they're afraid, whether it's of the leader or just the culture hasn't been created where they feel that they can disagree. And the word conflict is so scary to people. And even to me, I mean, we don't like conflict. Most of us are brought up that conflict isn't a positive. And so I do a lot of work with clients around, no, conflict is okay. Let's redefine it. That creating a culture where there isn't a fear of speaking up means that you'll get the best out of people. And so they'll bring their creativity, and therefore that leads to innovation in all sorts of areas.
Yeah, it's really interesting what you said about hierarchy. Because I heard a week ago that there was a research about hierarchy in companies. And this researcher went through IBM and all of the branches of IBM worldwide. So I think he went to 68 countries, something like that. Wow. Because they are all in the same company, he wanted to see the gaps. And he wanted to see the hierarchy, the way the processes go, the way they're working within the same company, more or less, in different locations. And he found out that Israel is the most flat one. There is no hierarchy, less than other places. Okay. And I never thought it's that important for a company to be innovative because of that feature, that specific requirement. Why do you think it's so important to have more flat organizations and less hierarchy in order to innovate?
Well, I think innovation, first of all, is not only about a product. It's an innovative way of working, perhaps. Maybe it's an innovative culture that you're trying to create. And that's definitely where I'm more located in terms of the work I do and the work I do with Inusual. We really are not focused on necessarily creating a product, but rather the product is the organization. So when we talk about that, and if you have a very strong hierarchy, I've watched it in team sessions, in team coaching sessions. People are much more afraid to speak up. The way that they speak about, managing up, managing down, my subordinates, and already that language around hierarchy means that certain people have answers, certain people have all the wisdom, certain people, there's certain assumptions that go along with that hierarchical design and language. So, I mean, I think it makes a huge difference in how people show up to a team, for example.
Yeah. So what you're saying is they need to be more equal in a sense in order to have the discussion and to all of them have the ideas and to all of them express what they think is better or not. And really to share their vision, they need to be more closer than just I'm underneath you and I'm afraid that you might be upset at what I say, or maybe you will harm my promotion afterwards, or maybe it's not good to say what I think, something like that.
Exactly. And I think most of us could think of our own just personal situations where we enter into a dynamic where we feel equal. And so whether it's something like how we decide where we're going to dinner, but you feel equal, you'll give your opinion, you'll give ideas. But if you already go into it assuming that somebody else is for some reason the leader of the situation, you may be quieter. And I think now take that very simple dynamic to a team. And when you're in a position like a coach, for example, of a team, you can watch how people they measure their words. They're much more cautious. And oftentimes, if you do encourage them to speak up, they have fabulous ideas, observations, but they're less confident to bring them.
Yeah, that's interesting. Another thing that you mentioned is being argumentative or expressing your thoughts, even if they're not the usual normal thoughts that was said before you. And I think that's it's really strange because like in Israel we're always arguing, like the way we talk is arguing, like we always express our ideas, and for us it's just obvious. Like I think that there are not many people in the tech industry where I come from in Israel that would think twice before they say it's not going to work. We don't think it's a good idea. Sometimes they over criticize, I would say,
Wow.
but they will surely say what they think, and everyone would say what they think.
Well, and Addie, that's so interesting because that is definitely not the case in all cultures. And arguing, it's interesting because I said conflict and being able to disagree, and you say arguing. And as an American, maybe there's something about being a woman, the idea of having arguments at work that I go, ooh, no. And most, people that I interact with here, that's not necessarily something they want to get into. Conflict is that bad word, right? But yeah. I think that people need to set down guidelines in their organizations and their teams of how are we going to disagree so that it feels comfortable, because culturally, you're saying in Israel, that may feel really comfortable to people. They don't feel uncomfortable in what you would call an argument. I think, for example, Americans aren't necessarily as comfortable with that. And in my experience with working with a team of British, they're very polite. They're very polite in how they come across. And so you always need to sort of create an agreement around how can we disagree and be comfortable with it.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's not necessarily going to create the benefit that you think it might if you are, in your case, you say Israeli and you're used to saying what you think and even arguing about it. It may shut other people down culturally due to their cultural background. So I think as we work really globally, we all need to be aware of how we show up due to our culture and how somebody else may not be giving the same meaning behind what they're saying that you're attributing to it.
Yeah. It reminds me of someone who works in sales. And he said that when an American says, yeah, we love it, it means that they will never buy because he's just being polite.
Yeah, no, I think some of that is true, right? Okay. Yeah, that sounds great. Okay.
That sounds, very exciting. Yeah. I think it's like the brilliant. It's brilliant in England, but it might be really brilliant in the UK, but it's still like, it's a word. It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. And I think actually a book that I think is so interesting around this topic is The Culture Map. Are you familiar with this book?
No, tell me about it.
It's really good. The author, I'm just writing it, Erin Meyer, but it's a book about this, and it talks about different areas, how different cultures lead, how, which cultures are more hierarchical. And because if you are put as a leader or you're working with a team that is from a different culture, members from a different culture, they will expect different things from communication. They will expect different interactions in terms of feedback. People from sort of Northern Europe can often be extremely direct in their feedback. No, that was terrible. Whereas somebody from the South or from even the United States, they will just cringe and kind of, so how do we figure that out and navigate that? But so the culture map is a good read to get an idea of all those different
Yeah.
aspects that can show up differently.
Yeah, it sounds really interesting. So, how
Mhm.
do you help these leaders to become more innovative if they are right now, as we expressed, more hierarchical, less willing to take fearful actions, less
Mhm.
willing to be in conflict, so
Yeah.
forth?
So we so in my coaching and in my work with Inusual has in fact developed a whole program around helping people to develop as more innovative leaders. And there has what we say are the 5 habits, and they're about understanding your purpose and really around self-awareness and how I show up, the impact I make, how I commit to that purpose. And then from there, it goes into the more hands-on innovation tools that you probably work with a lot around agility or Scrum or all of those kinds of things, sort of an oversight so that we understand that. But we're much more on the people side. So it would be the conspire, right, in the positive sense of how do we work together and create trust. So making people aware of these elements, the importance of trust, and what it looks like when there's self-awareness on a team and everybody can participate, and what does that collaboration look like compared to a top-down collaboration. So I think it's really both in my coaching and in my work with Unusual, which is coaching and training. We want to be really conscious of having leaders experience what's the difference and what's possible, right? And then from there, how do we inspire? How do we influence people to bring their best selves to show up at work? And the 5th would be around emotional intelligence and self-care and balance, and how as leaders you need to do those things, model self-care, model balance, model emotional intelligence. And again, you're going to get people showing up, including yourself, in the healthiest and most positive way to be creative.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that most of what you said is like more I would say, an emotional aspect of leadership. Would you say that? Or a social aspect of leadership?
It is. It's really around creating the culture to be able
Mhm.
for people to do the work they need to do, including innovation. So innovation around culture, innovation around leadership, and then of course innovation for clients and finding the value and the benefit you want to create in the world.
And do you feel that there are some teams who are more open to hearing these kinds of, you need to work on yourself, you need to be aware, you need to be like inspire, or not? Like most people will be connected. Yeah, this is what needs to be done.
Yes, absolutely. I think there are some that they're further along on that path because it is really innovation in management. Somebody like Gary Hamel talks about it, management was designed for the Industrial Revolution and people on mass production lines. And now it's a totally different thing. Leaders needing to give meaning to people and give them space to be creative, since we're saying that, and showing up in a different way. So it's more around, yeah, I think it's just different. It's a different way of looking at things completely. And some teams haven't interacted with these ideas before. And so you see them really wanting to duck away from the feeling, the questions around, well, how does it feel to work in this team? And they'll say, well,
Yeah.
we need a strategy,
Yeah.
right? So they go
Yeah.
much
Yeah.
more toward the management tools that they know and love,
Yeah.
where they feel comfortable. And that's normal. That's normal. That's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay to start there.
Yeah.
What's neat is to take a team, a client through a process where they start to realize that, oh, there's a different way that could also be interesting and
Yeah.
beneficial.
Yeah. It sounds like the analytical point of view, or the more, I would say, manly point of view, is just changing. And I would say it's for me, it sounds more feminine to say, how do I feel about what I'm doing? What are my goals? How do I relate to my eternal self? And how do I inspire others? For me, that's why I called it emotional or social work as a leader. And it's just my guess, and tell me, what do you think, that if they have more women in the leadership team, it will be easier for them, for the women and for the team? That's what I think. What do you think?
Absolutely. So yes, I mean, I think there's something around the fact that we realize now in 2021 that those of us who are working in leadership and who are leaders that are trying to grow and learn, that you don't check part of yourself at the door when you come into work or when you lead. And you're not really that different in the two places. There may be aspects that are, but actually to be an authentic leader is more inspirational. And so when we can realize who we are as a whole person, which means including the emotional side, because it affects how effective we are in our decision making. It affects how effective we are in our viewpoint. So I think now the idea that we need to bring that all is the new aspect, maybe newer. It's been around for a while, thanks to Daniel Goleman and company. But I think that, yes, and it's also proven that teams that have more women are more effective. And that does often come down to the fact that, like people, teams have an emotional intelligence. And so if women tend to be more emotionally intelligent, and I think that that's changing. I think a lot of men are growing that. I see it all the time. Those teams are more effective.
Yeah, it sounds right, and I think that it's always surprising to me that, like, most people, when they think about leaders, they think about the strategy, they think about the business, they think about the way that they are operating and telling other people what to do, and everyone is saying, yes, you're so right, we should do it. And but actually, when we're thinking about inspiring people and being a leader and not just a manager, it's something else, and it requires something different from you, and the way you see yourself is different, I think. And
Absolutely.
and it requires change in yourself, like in the way that you see yourself.
Mm-hmm. I think it requires a lot of change in how you see yourself and the assumptions that we all have on what we need to do as a leader. I've been a teacher for many years as well. And when you start teaching, you think you have to know everything and you have to have all the answers. And I think a lot of the leaders that I work with are similar. Well, I need to have the answers. I need to know the vision. I need to know the strategy. And so sometimes my job is to ask the question of, well, and what would happen if you didn't? And you asked, what would change? Right? So that requires people to look inwards and be confident with not always knowing or not having control.
Yeah. It's dealing with fear and vulnerability, the fact that you don't
Absolutely.
know. Yeah.
Vulnerability is a big one. Right? The leader needs to go first at being vulnerable. So
yeah. And then you allow your team to ask questions that they think, maybe I will sound stupid if I ask, maybe it's not a good thing to ask. Or if you're vulnerable and you're saying, I might not know everything, and other people could next to you say, you know what, I didn't understand it fully too. Right? So.
I see it all the time, and I've experienced it working on teams. I mean, being a part of a team, or I've gone through that, and I have been there with the idea of, I don't want to ask that question. They're going to think I'm stupid. And what you realize is when you start asking the questions, you are rarely alone. And if you're alone, it's okay, right? But that needs to be, that's the whole part of creating that culture, that it really does need to be okay if somebody doesn't understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. And when we're thinking about creating something new and innovative, you are in the unknown. You are in the uncertainties. You don't know. You really don't know. So you need to be able to live in this unknown state longer than just a few minutes. You need to be acquainted to that sense of, I don't know, but it's okay. Like you need to do both.
Comfort in the discomfort. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And I think that most leaders and most people are trying to avoid these situations. And then you will never grow because you're staying in what you know really fully and you're sure of yourself there. And then you just stay there.
And that's what we talk about. For example, my colleagues and Unusual, we've had a lot of conversations around that idea. We've definitely talked about, is it okay to be uncomfortable, and how do we get people to be okay with all of that?
Yeah, it's hard.
To because that might be the biggest hurdle if they have the assumption that the leader needs to understand. But that goes two ways, because when you're in a culture where the leader does know, and you're used to being on a team where the leader is the one telling you, you also aren't used to taking the initiative. So the training needs to be full circle. It needs to be really with everybody. It's a team effort in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
It
people
reminds
need to learn to put themselves out there.
Sure. It reminds me of a funny story of an Israeli company. They built a system for electricity companies, so very, very big companies. And they tried, it's a security company for these kinds of organizations. And they went to a few countries and they did a drill. They tried to attack the system and see everyone is like, you could handle it with our system and then you could just act upon and make everything fine. And they did it in a few countries and they know how it's supposed to be done. And then they came to China, to the biggest company in China, something like that. I'm not sure. And then they told them, that's the system. Now we're going to attack you. The drill is starting. Let's go. And they're starting to attack them and being stronger and stronger. And it gets to a point that the facility is at risk. They could just close it down and they don't do nothing. The team is not doing anything.
Really?
So they just stopped the drill in the middle and they came into the room and they asked them, why didn't we're attacking you, and they don't respond to anything. And they said, but you didn't say who is calling the shots. Who is the one to do it?
Absolutely. So that goes back to the culture. That goes back to how culture can affect, in this case, the agility of a team to respond to the outside world. And, we use that term VUCA, the volatility, uncertainty, change, and ambiguity. And that's the world we're living in. Everything is changing so quickly now. And so it's no longer a question of if you will have some sort of, whether it's an attack, that's a great metaphor, no matter what, whether it's an attack or a change or COVID, a world pandemic. It's really when and what will you do in the face of it? And that has brought up so many issues for teams, for companies that just couldn't adapt. And then just the growing pains of having to adapt and doing it, but having to really shift mindsets and protocols.
Yeah. It really makes sense what you're saying about the volatility and ambiguity and it goes it's a different direction, but it's always in my mind. I have 4 kids and I always say, what would they know? What they need to know when they grow up, when they'll be grown-ups. And I always come to the same conclusion that what they need is to learn change. They need to know how to work in change, emotionally, in their career, in their general life. And it seems that we don't know enough in order to teach that, which is so, so important.
I think you're right, Adi. I don't think that this is something that they're learning. They don't learn it in school. But I think that's changing. I think I'm seeing emotional intelligence is in the syllabus now. It's in, the curriculum in different ways. They're educating teachers on that to be able to help children. And I think, of course, at home, the more aware we are and that of course is key. I love the way you're looking at that. I really do. And it makes me think, how do I work with this with my kids? Because that's the disappointment, and whether it blocks them or whether they're able to keep going. And that's what we see with organizations. It's the same thing. And so the organizations are like the big kids who don't know what to do.
These kids grow and then they become leaders. And as a leader, you need to adjust to change as much. And if surely when the world is changing so fast, you need to be aware that this is a capability of, this is what I thought till now. This is what I knew till now. And I'm doing it just perfectly. But I need to do something else. But it's not enough.
And that I work, that's really the difference at this point between a manager, a sort of old school manager or boss, and a leader fit for these times. And, the sort of manager person bases what they will do always on what they've always done. And I think somebody who is really leading towards the future, for innovation, is willing to sit with that discomfort, accept the change. So there's the whole aspect of, first you have to accept it, the volatility or the up and down, and will not necessarily have the answers, but will find a way to find them, which often means, I don't have the answers, bringing the team together. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And those are the companies that were able to grow. And I think last week, I interviewed the chief product officer of Athleta, which is owned by Gap, and one of the biggest earning Gap companies. And in fact, I loved what she said about innovation and being able to do that turnaround. They got together and they found the people who would be good at this. And by May 1st, or the first bit of May last year, they already had a line of masks out for their clients, for their customer base. They already had that out because they were able to not freeze and say, oh, nobody's shopping, but rather, what can we do in this to serve? What's the need? They thought of themselves in that way. And they also brought out a sleep line. I mean, those are amazing stories.
Right. And what you just mentioned is that the fact that there are so new, open, unmet needs out there, and there are so many gaps you could fill with your capabilities. If you're seeing that, if you're aware of the potential of the opportunities out there, and most companies are just freezing because, something changed. It's not as before in many cases, and they're not doing it. Although they can, if they were open-minded, they could do it. Sure.
I saw it a lot here. Just one more kind of fun example for me was, there was a restaurant cafe here where I live, and they were closed for so long, the restaurants, and the restaurant's business has suffered so greatly. And one day I walked by and they had these really cute, very attractive red and white awnings that they'd put out over a window, put a crepe machine out, and started selling sandwiches, crepes, brought their espresso machine and cinnamon rolls. So it was a walk-up window. And they were innovating. They were saying, okay, well, we cannot serve the meals and the cocktails like we usually do. Now we need to. And kids go there after school now to pick up a crepe. Yeah.
I would go now if I wouldn't be on dieting. I would go.
I think it was really fun.
We just need to mention that although you have a very perfect American accent, you're in Barcelona right now. So I didn't mention that. And Spain in general was really affected by COVID-19.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So I'm originally from Chicago, which thus the accent.
Perfect.
But I've been living in Barcelona for almost 14 years.
Wow. So tell us about the difference in the way that people are thinking, and the leaders that you talk to, is like how different they are.
So I'm in a different role, total transparency. I do very different things professionally here now, but in terms of than I did in the United States. So my worlds are a little bit different, but in terms of cultural differences, and you and I have spoken a little bit about this, I think the way that people show up and are able to, I mean, it goes a little bit to the hierarchy thing, I think. I think in general, what we'd say the old school Spanish, many of those companies and those are very hierarchical. And as you would see if in the culture map, for example, they talk about the fact that when you have a very strong religion, like Catholicism is a very hierarchical religion. When you have a monarchy, that's typically very hierarchical. So you end up, that filters all the way through a society. And I think that impacts how leaders lead very much, much more authoritarian, much more leader knows top down. I also think it shows up in the way people interview for jobs, for example. I think they're not necessarily taught from culturally to be able to promote themselves. So I've had to help people be able to promote themselves in a way that doesn't feel uncomfortable, because I think even as Americans, we were taught we don't brag. You can't brag. You can't be arrogant. But we were taught that if you go to a job interview, you need to be able to say what you do well and feel confident about it and demonstrate a certain level of confidence. And so I've done a lot of work around demonstrating confidence and creating confidence in themselves, both men and women coming to me in leadership positions saying, I feel like I need to feel more confident, because they know the impact is very different when you show confidence and humility, the combination. So
of course.
I've noticed that those kinds of differences, for example.
When we're thinking about Americans, to me, it always seems that they're like used to speaking for themselves, or the debate club and talking about like doing business is something which is like very common in the US, as I feel. Maybe you'll tell me more, but and
So.
they're so used to doing these kinds of, like, these are the talks which is natural for them. And maybe therefore they're so good at sales, for example. Like, this is what I feel.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak. It's very general. And what I do realize too is that different parts of the United States are so different. What I realized stepping away is, yes, we share a common thread, but there are very different parts of the US. But I think you're right. We do build in debate, conversation, things like this. I do think that in terms of conflicts, I think we mentioned it earlier, we're different, in feedback. We're not really, we need to be very polite. We're also very polite. Maybe that comes from the British. The British are very polite. Lots of
very
please, lots of thank you. A little bit more indirect in terms of feedback. And I had an Israeli client who told me he had to change his whole way of communicating, because it was being taken so harshly and by his team. So,
I totally understand what he's saying. Like, it's a different language. So we think that we know English, but we don't really know how Americans think. And we're saying that because most big companies in Israel, they from day one look at the US. Like, for them, that's the market. They know that they don't have any market. So that's the market that they're aiming for.
Well, and I do think that they're innovative in trying new things. I mean, we look at the companies that have set the bar, like the Googles. I mean, in terms of culture and innovation, better than anybody. Right?
Sure. So we didn't talk about something which is like really important to me: growth mindset. How do you think it's something that you hear more and more people talking about? How you see that impacting innovation?
I think it's key. And you say that in your book as well. Huh? I think it's absolutely, I think it's possibly the most important thing, that combined with a couple other things. But I would say a growth mindset, as Carol Dweck, it talks about that grit, as we say in English. The grit, just, you fall down, you get back up. You fall down, you get back up. You have challenges. And I think I talk about resilience too. I've done some talks about resilience. It's become a very hot topic in the last year. So I've talked with companies about resilience. I've talked about resilient teams, and I think the growth mindset, it goes right into that. So last week I was working with a team, and they're at a big transition point. Of course, they're dealing, as we all are, with the COVID situation. They have new leadership. They have so many things that they're dealing with. And we did an activity, a sort of dynamic, fun activity where they could look at that, because built into the activity was, this time you did this communication activity. What did you do well? What didn't go well? What will you do next time? And as we did that, and they did it very naturally, because it's not very emotional that they messed up this Lego game. We talked about the importance of that, and then we can sort of take it into the world of their work. Where do you need to do this more? How would it benefit? How would it benefit your team? And how might it help in this time of transition? With what do you already do well, and what do you want to bring forward? And what do you need to let go of? What isn't working? And next week, maybe you don't have to look, what will we do? What will we do differently next week? And then the next week. So creating that culture of it's okay to learn and grow, an assumption that we will be doing that continuously, so important.
Yeah, and it's okay to unlearn some of the things. Let
go.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, I think it's really important. Most people think it's like adding more and more to what they're doing, but it's not only that. They need to really adjust it in a way that sometimes they need to really let go of some of the thoughts that really worked out for them till now, but it's not working anymore.
Well, and I think that's really important, right? It doesn't mean it didn't work before. Maybe it did work before, and now it's not appropriate, or now it's not the best answer.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I have like lots of like additional talks, like questions that we could talk about, but I have like one less question. So what is your number one tip for innovation leaders?
I think start with the groundwork. If you want to create an innovative team, a team that's willing to show up, you've got to start with the groundwork. And to me, that's trust. Your team's going to go nowhere if you don't create trust. And psychological safety, the term from Amy Edmondson around psychological safety, which means that people are willing to take risks. And that's where the work is for leaders, in my opinion. Create that dynamic where it's okay to take a risk, which means it's okay to fail. Doesn't mean failing endlessly on the same thing. It means you're willing to fail, learn from it, and do it right the next time.
Sure.
So without trust, you're going nowhere.
Yeah, I love you. I love this one. I think it's really important in general. I think that it's not only in business. If you want something done, you need to build trust around you. And if not, it will be very hard to get there in general with people.
I 100% agree.
Sounds really good. So how could people hear more about your work and Inusual and contact you with questions and so forth?
Well, so they can definitely look on the Inusual website. So that would be one way. They can contact me and the Inusual website is very interesting. The Inusual network is also sort of a great network of people who think along these lines and want to create innovative spaces in their work organizations. So they're sharing ideas regularly on the network. So I would say go to the network for that aspect. For me, my email, I could share that. I don't know how.
Sure. I would add it to the description, of course.
Okay. So yeah, my email, Kristin at kristinberrycoaching.com, but also through Inusual.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Okay. I want to thank you. It's been such a pleasure. Always fun talking to you. So thank you, Kristin.
Thank you so much. It was really a pleasure.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. And I really hope that others learned from it and enjoyed it as well.
Well, let's be in contact soon, Adi.
We should. You're right. We will do it. And to all of you change makers out there, thank you for joining us. And if you want to learn more about my work, please visit invincibleinnovation.com. And I'll see you next week with another innovative, insightful talk. See ya.
Thank you.
I'm Mazor Kario, and you've been listening to the Invincible Innovation Podcast. Make sure to visit our website, invincibleinnovation.com, where you can learn more about our programs and my book, Innovating Through Chaos. I'll be waiting for you next week in our next episode. Thank you for listening.